to the Draft Deeper podcast. This is your host, Nathan Grubel. Joining me, as always, is my producer, Kevin Black. And also joining us on the show today, Draft Twitter's favorite, MavsDraft, co-host of the LockedOn NBA Draft podcast, Richard Steyman. Rich, how you doing today, buddy?
Hey, I'm doing pretty good. Thank you guys for having me. It's good to be back.
Yes, sir. Second time on the pod. Absolutely love it, my friend. So the reason why I wanted to have you on, I wanted to do at least a few pods here, looking at some of the lottery teams specifically with someone who is either a big fan of them or who is covering them. You are an Orlando Magic and a Dallas Mavericks guy, obviously with the name being MavsDraft. I hope you're a Dallas Mavericks guy, but we were literally just talking and going over it. Other than talking about undrafted free agents for the Mavericks, because they don't have a draft pick, which we will get into that a little bit, we're really talking about who the Magic would be targeting in the first round, because they do have 2 lottery picks. So that's what makes them really interesting, and that's why I definitely wanted to talk about them on the podcast. And then I'll visit the Golden State situation a little more in depth at a later point. But let's stick with the Orlando Magic, Rich. So obviously picks number 5 and 8. What would you like to see happen with both of those picks before we get into like specific names? What do you think the Magic's needs are that they can fill with those 2 picks?
Yeah, so I think it starts with just getting the 2 best players available. I think that's really what the Magic need to look at, without, of course, overlapping some of the current talent in their core. I don't think they want to necessarily get someone like Jonathan Isaac, who is an absolute stalwart on defense, but I think they want, and someone who maybe not isn't that strong on offense. Like Jonathan Isaac probably tops out as a 15 points per game guy with great defense. So I don't know if someone like Scottie Barnes is who you want to. You kind of put him in he's one of the best players available, but does he overlap? So I would go with Kamenga and Bouknight are my 2 top picks.
Okay, so let's actually dive right into those names. And it's really interesting, Rich, you bring up those 2 guys. I believe those are the 2 guys that I actually mocked out for the Magic on one of the shows I was on last week. When I'm looking at the Orlando Magic, it doesn't seem clear cut to me in terms of what they can fill with those specific picks. Like when you look at the guys who are predicted to be available and guys who would have like a 5 through 12 grade, I don't think there's necessarily a clean fit for many of them. You mentioned Bouknight at number 8. I was actually going to ask you, Rich, he's definitely been a target for the Magic. At least he's being mocked to be a target. Would you take him with the 5th pick, not necessarily waiting for him to slide to the 8th pick? Because I know that he's been the 5th guy on your board, and even had some people come out like Jeff Goodman. I think I even tagged you on that tweet when he put that out. But you had him saying that he could be a target for the Magic at 5. I've always thought about that. When you kind of have one guy you think fills a need, do you just go up and take that guy regardless of if it might be a reach, or do you take your chances on best player available, maybe see if he's comes around on the 2nd pick? Would you definitely feel comfortable waiting to take him at 8?
Yeah, I mean, I think that he's going to be gone by 7. I think that I don't think he gets past the Warriors, to be quite honest. So I have no problem taking him at 5. I also don't know how happy I'd be about passing up on Kamenga at 5, because I have Kamenga at 4. This sounds like a hot take when I say things like this, but I really genuinely am a believer in Jonathan Kamenga. Having him 4th, I have him higher than Jalen Green, and nothing really against Green. I have him on the same tier. It's just I think Kuminga's upside as that point forward is just so ridiculously high, and that he has the superstar mold. Even if he only has like a 25-33% chance of hitting it, you still take the swing at the fences for him. Like, so I would be a little bit worried to not take Kamenga, but I also wouldn't mind taking Bouknight because he's my 5th ranked player, so it aligns perfectly with the board.
So my main question about Kamenga regarding going to the Orlando Magic is, obviously if Jonathan Isaac comes back, he's the power forward. And I don't anticipate him being ready for the start, like right at the start of next season. I don't know if you would have any different thoughts about that, Rich, but Isaac's your starting power forward, and your starting small forward spot. I mean, Chuma Okeke played pretty decently last year, so I feel like if you do draft Kamenga with a top 5 pick, I think he would have to be a little understanding that he may not be the starter for the Orlando Magic coming into the year, unless you think, since you are valuing him a little higher than some people may, do you think that he'd be a better starting fit with that current core of guys better than Okeke? Or who would you roll with in that small forward spot if you draft Kamenga?
Yeah, I think you don't put him as a day one starter, which is a really weird situation. However, though, you could play him starters minutes because Jonathan Isaac, like you
Yes.
said, I mean, I think he will be back by the start of the season, but he's not going to be playing starter minutes till a few games into the season. Like he's not ready for 30 minutes right off the bat, I don't think. So I think there's something to be said for that, where you could make a lineup where Okeke and Kamenga have the same thing. They're very similar players, which I guess kind of rounding this out does make it easier to pass on Kamenga because if you're all in on Okeke, which the Magic seem to be, but you could roll out a lineup where you have your two guards, Okeke, Kamenga, Isaac, or Carter at the 5, where it's very interchangeable with what they have currently at the front court. So it makes it easier to move Kamenga in there.
You're not wrong. You made an excellent argument about the minutes, the number of minutes that he can play, not necessarily just being named in that starting lineup. I agree wholeheartedly. The other point that you brought up, Rich, that I wanted to hit on. So this draft has the potential to get a little crazy. And what I mean by that is we likely know that Cade Cunningham's going at number 1 to the Pistons. I know Jalen Green's being mocked to Houston. The more mocks that pop up from media members who are really well connected to some of these staffs, you see Green's name popping up more and more and more. But I personally, just being able to see who's actually in that front office and who they've brought in specifically to their scouting department, some other draft Twitter contributors who I know are analytics heavy, I'd be shocked if they don't take Mobley. That's the direction that I think they're going to go. Then you get to Cleveland at number 3. Cleveland's been known to do some wild shit. Like it just is what it is. It's just part of their character. Like you could talk about the Anthony Bennett pick, but like at the time, like the Dion Waiters pick was a little bit of a head scratcher. Not everybody necessarily agreed with taking Tristan Thompson as high as they did in a draft as well. So like they're known to go a little bit off the board. I know Chad Ford's talked about Scottie Barnes potentially being a target for them with the 3rd pick. And that wouldn't shock me in the slightest whatsoever. And then you move to Toronto with the whole Kyle Lowry situation. It seems to me like Jalen Suggs is the perfect target for them. And I really think that that's where he's going to go as well. I don't think Suggs slides. I think that he's one guy that Masai Ujiri is going to respect during the whole draft process. I think that's where they go. So I would have Jalen Green ranked higher. Like he's in the same tier for me as Cade Cunningham. I know you and I would disagree on that, but if Jalen Green is the guy who's there at 5, so it could be between Jalen Green and Jonathan Kuminga. There's nothing that would entice you to take Jalen Green there, possibly, or even.
So sorry to cut you off. To be clear, I do think that getting Jalen Green at 5 is a better value. I know that kind of completely contradicts everything I've just said about Kamenga being ranked higher, but I think if you look at the Orlando Magic specifically, and really just as at the draft as a whole, like your main objective when you draft players, is it not to, get the best available talent and try and get the highest upside players? Because if you are and like having that best chance, Jalen Green does have a higher ceiling, I think, than Kamenga. Again, I know I'm completely contradicting it. And I also think Jalen Green's game is easier to develop. So just to be clear, if it were just to answer that, if the Magic would, if they had to choose between the two or had somehow the luxury of having Jalen Green, I don't think he falls past 3. I would take that in a heartbeat.
So let's say that choice was on the table, and I personally get to fantasize a little bit because you and I both know how much I love Cole Anthony coming out of the draft last year. I still think that he really proved it this past year. Like he would have made my all rookie first team really for 2 reasons. I know there was some inconsistency because of the injury, but he hit 2 game winners as a rookie. Both very impressive shots. The poise, the composure that he played with all year long, and the fact that we know that he can be a 3-level scorer from that point guard spot, but he also really developed excellent chemistry with his teammates and was becoming a better floor general and a leader from that spot, not necessarily just a scorer. So I really like the development that I saw from year start to year end from him. But then you put somebody like Jalen Green next to him. So now you're talking about the situation that I would like Houston to dip into a little bit, which is Houston has Kevin Porter Jr., right? They have another dynamo at that lead guard spot potentially who can just fill it up, get buckets. And we see time and time again in the playoffs having two shot creators like that at the 1 and the 2 spots, and the 2 and the 3, basically those guard wing lead shot generators. Those are the guys that are helping win some of these tight playoff games in these high stakes basketball games. So if you have a backcourt, a scoring backcourt like Cole Anthony and Jalen Green, I mean, yeah, you talked about taking the guy with the higher ceiling and the best overall talent. I think Jalen Green would probably be the best fit for that Magic team out of the majority of these guys that we could talk about. Do you agree with that, or do you disagree with that?
Yeah, I would agree with it. I mean, again, Jalen Green, and especially on the Magic have just such a weird thing, and it's almost the same thing though as the James Bouknight argument that comes up a lot, where it's like you already have Cole Anthony, you already have R.J. Hampton, you already have Markelle Fultz. But at this point, like, although I am one of the highest on Cole Anthony, I had him number 5 last year on my board. Like, I love him, but you're not attached to anybody outside of maybe Okiki at this point. He's probably the cornerstone, I would say. I mean, I feel like I'm blanking on someone as I say that, but even with Jonathan Isaac, like, he has health issues. So I think you just got to keep getting talent and ignore all the fit as much as possible, as long as there's no overlap in development. That's where you don't want to cross the line.
Yeah, I mean, so you paid Isaac, you paid Fultz, but to your point, you're not necessarily as attached to those guys because of their injury histories. It's not necessarily even about their play on the court, because Markelle Fultz probably would have had an incredible breakout year had he not gotten injured. And the same could have been said for Isaac. We all know how good of a defensive player he is, but he could have really made some strides offensively, because we know he's been heavily working on that part of his game. So you have those two guys, you have Okiki, but yeah, the other guys around them. I mean, Cole Anthony is only going into his second year. R.J. Hampton's only going to be going into his second year. There's even though I'm a big fan of Wendell Carter Jr., there's questions about him too, because of his stagnant development offensively, as well as he hasn't been the most perimeter switchy big as he was possibly advertised to be when he was coming out, and then he's had injury trouble as well. So I agree, you're not really married to anybody necessarily on that roster except for Chuma Okiki, if he doesn't have any more injury concerns either. Um, so if you look at who's probably available there at 5, we talked about Kamenga. We talked about the possibility of Green sliding. There's a possibility that Scotty Barnes could be available at 5 there as well. What do you think about Scotty Barnes, Rich? What's kind of your scouting report on him, and do you think that he might be a possible fit in that front court should they choose to either move on from somebody else in that front court, or if one of those guys gets injured, goes down again, he might be a really intriguing piece to slot in there, and maybe he becomes one of those long-term guys you have in the front court spot moving forward.
Yeah, so I really do like Scotty Barnes. I had him as high as 3 before the G League Ignite season started, just because the G League guys were easy to bump down at one point. So I really do like Scotty Barnes. Really long strides. He's a pretty good slasher because of those long strides. So he can get to the rim very quickly. I think I saw a play the other day where he took one dribble inside, like at the 3-point line, just inside it, and was at the rim within 2 steps. And it's just, he's absurd. It's the honest level of strides and length using in terms of how he uses it. So there's a lot to like. I think that's a really underrated area. People say he's a passing and defender. I think it undersells how good of a slasher he is. He does need to obviously develop his handle and just get better at breaking guys down. But I think that's something that would come with time. But at the end of the day, right now is probably the worst time to be comparing someone to him, given his semifinals in the Eastern Conference. But if you got a Ben Simmons type right now who isn't much worse than him, I think the athleticism drop off is noticeable between the two. But if you got that in Orlando, I think that'd actually almost be a dream, given how the front office has made a clear emphasis of their identity being defense. Like, that's what they want their mantra to be, and that's what it has been since this new front office took over in 2017. So Scotty Barnes fills that a lot.
I mean, a really smart pick and roll partner to bring in and keep developing alongside Cole Anthony, I think would be a very smart move for Orlando if he was there, because that's really the one play type where you want Cole to excel better at. And he was already showing that he was able to develop some of that chemistry with his other teammates playing out of those pick and roll sets. That's why, as much as I wanted to see Vooch go to a contender, I didn't want him to be traded to Chicago. I didn't want him to be involved in a deal like that, because I thought that if he wasn't going to go to a contender, he was developing really good chemistry with Cole Anthony. I think that he helped his growth more than anything, because you saw at the beginning of the season, not a lot of his teammates necessarily trusted him or wanted to pass him the ball back all the time because they thought that he was just going to immediately go up and shoot it. But Vooch was that one guy who really looked like he took him under his wing and gave him an opportunity to express himself more offensively, teach him how to play in those pick and roll style sets, and the chemistry that they had together, I think really showed a playmaking side to Cole that not a lot of people, besides us and a few others who are really high on him, of course, thought that he had to his game. What would you say about that in terms of the type of front court partner that Cole needs to better vibe with? What if Scottie Barnes was the pick? Do you think that Cole Anthony could take another leap in his playmaking if he was able to play alongside another intelligent guy like that?
Yeah, no, I think it's really well said, and a lot of people outside of Magic fans don't see that. So I appreciate that, first of all. Something I had said last year, I think we might have even talked about this. Like, I can't remember if we talked about Cole too much last year, but something I'd said was the NBA spacing for him was terrible. It was all 2-point shooters. It's very hard to thrive in an offense like that. And from day one, you saw that how he used screens, how teams didn't just suffocate on him, and he honestly wasn't used to it. It was kind of noticeable even in the preseason. It was like, wait, aren't you going to like all swarm me? And that is a huge adjustment Cole has made, and I think that really helps him just get to his spots as he gets better at hitting those pull-up jump shots. Having someone like Vucevic who sets those great screens, and on top of that, you have to respect him as both a popper and a roller out in the pick and roll. It makes him just that much more lethal. So if you could get someone around him like that, it's why I really wanted. If the Magic couldn't get Cade Cunningham, you get that kind of threat to an extent too, depending on how much you buy his shooting. So yeah, I agree. Cole Anthony gets that pull up shooting down, and you're going to see a big jump from him because of his big man.
We're in agreement with that one, 100%, my friend. I think we pretty much hit on who we would target at 5. So then we moved to 8, and I agree with you. I think James Bouknight at this point is probably the right pick for him. He measured out well enough at the combine. Your co-runner on the LockedOn NBA Draft Show, Rafael Barlow, tweeted out yesterday that he's really seen some awesome shooting performances in the workouts that he's seen up close with Bouknight over the past week. And I asked him specifically about his catch and shoot mechanics. How comfortable is he shooting from a standstill in some of these workouts that you're seeing? Because that always, to me, was the biggest part of his game offensively that he needed to improve on. Obviously, you can talk about like secondary playmaking and playing out of the pick and roll as things that he's going to need to get better at, sure. But I think those are a little further down the road than his first like year and a half in the NBA. I don't think he's going to be asked to have a lot of those responsibilities. So if we're talking about from a scoring perspective at that 2 spot, we know how deadly he can be off the ball, doing the smart things with handoffs and cuts to the basket and all of those things. But his standstill shooting, I mean, some of his shooting percentages from outside were pretty questionable at UConn. So that, to me, was always going to be the biggest area of improvement for him. You bring him into that shooting guard spot, Rich. What to me, well, actually, why don't you just start by giving me your scouting report on Bouknight? I've heard bits and pieces of it when you've talked about it on your show, as well as with Chuck specifically on the Chucking Darts podcast. Why don't you give me your scouting report on him for first and foremost, because I know you have him as a top 5 guy.
Yeah, so I think it starts with the fact that his mold translates just so smoothly. In years past, you've seen those guys are the guys who come in right away and just light defenses up. He's an excellent ball handler. I think he's a great space creator, a little bit late to the game, so could keep getting better there, but that's also kind of a weird narrative. And also great athlete, and I really do trust his instincts and overall basketball IQ, especially on the defensive end more than the offensive end, which is weird for a guy like him who is made off of scoring. But overall, I think I see a 3-level score because of that athleticism. I think once he gets that shot selection a little bit better, I think that really hurt his 3-point percentage this year. I think he shot 32%. So I don't think that's something that's indicative of who he is as a shooter. I think that was just more about his shot selection than his shooting skill. So I really just buy him as a potential secondary, tertiary creator for others at least, and then really good primary self-creator on a team.
So my comparison for Book Night, Rich, and I'll ask you for your closest comparison to him or shades of in a second. But my comparison for him all along has been Gary Harris, who ironically is now on the Orlando Magic because of that trade that they did with Denver. And I think if you bring in Book Night at number 8, number one, him and Cole obviously have chemistry to work together long term from their AAU days. So that's really important. You're getting two teammates back together. They would love playing with each other. So that's a positive right there. But number two, you have somebody like Harris who hasn't been the dynamo on-ball shot creator really in his career that Book Night has been. But Harris has also been somebody who has had to find different ways to score, similar to how Book Knight's done it at UConn. Gary can be a mentor in terms of how to better approach those situations in the NBA. And I think he can also be a good defensive mentor for him on the perimeter as well. Because I think if Book Knight wants to lock down a starting spot long term, he's going to have to be able to defend better than he did at UConn to some degree. Although I wouldn't call him a poor defender, but I wouldn't call him above average. So, what do you think about that comparison, Rich? Who could a comparison be in your eyes for Book Night, and what do you think about that mentorship as long as Gary Harris is around?
Yeah, so I see a little bit more of the offensive upside than Gary Harris, but I'm not mad at it because I also like Gary Harris. So the 3 names I'd actually written down, 4 names, excuse me. I never compare guys to all stars unless they're at the top of the draft, and I hate doing it, but I'm going to do it anyway. So there's 2 all stars. I think they were both all stars this year that there's a lot of shades of, and then 2 really good scorers that haven't been all stars / weren't all stars. So the 2 all stars that I have are Zach Levine and Bradley Beal. I think there's a lot of similarities there. As not a primary creator, I think Bradley Beal's passing is his best case scenario in the playmaking department.
Yep.
And I think he's a blend of those 2 guys as a scorer to me, not as athletic as Zach Levine. So unfair to really compare anybody in that department to him. But then the 2 guys who weren't all-stars or haven't been are Colin Sexton and Monte Ellis. I see a lot of those, if you just blended all 4 of those players together. Yeah. What was that?
I said I love both of those guys. I love both Sexton and Monte Ellis.
Yeah, I mean, I loved Monte in Dallas. Like, what he did here, he should have been an all-star at least once. So, if you got that, that's the worst name of the 4 probably. If you got that, that's a damn good player.
Yeah, it is. So you mentioned that you think Beal's passing is like a best case scenario for Book Night. What do you think he really has to improve in the most from a playmaking perspective to really make some of that pop next to somebody like Cole Anthony or even a Markelle Fultz, 2 guys who would be looked at as primary distributors? How do you think Book Night gets easily involved in the secondary game, and how would you map out his development in that area?
Yeah, so I think it starts with I think he'll naturally get better as a playmaker with NBA spacing and NBA movement and things like that. And then the second thing is just if he improves as a drive and kick guy, you're going to see a lot improve on that front. So that's what I would say are the 2 things: is just natural improvement and development as as NBA spacing playmaker, and then also just as a drive and kick guy. Those are the 2 things he has to get better at.
Are there any other guys who you would look at as potential targets at that number 8 spot? I have one in mind, but I want to get who you might also look at first, because there's still some pretty interesting names on the board, even after the top 7 picks that go out. You imagine that if Golden State keeps their number 7 pick, the popular target for them has been Davion Mitchell this whole time, and I don't necessarily disagree with that, just given where they're at as a team. So let's assume that the guys we've talked about and then Davion Mitchell are off the board. You have Book Night, you have some other names there. Is there anybody else who you would think of as a potential target for them?
Yeah, there's a couple, and then I would say trade back. So the 2 I would say, and actually I'd say one is a pretty high floor guy, the other's a high ceiling guy of what he does good. And that's Moses Moody is the high floor guy. I would be very intrigued by him. I think the Magic do need to quickly. I know they're not trying to win, but they do need to quickly replace Evan Fournier's shooting. I feel like that's something that hasn't been talked about whatsoever. And then the other one would be swing for the defensive fences. Like I said, this is a team that their front office is trying to create a defensive identity for him. And that would be swing with Usman Garuba. I have him at number 10 on my board.
Cool.
I could justify it. And, he's probably got one of the top defensive upsides in the class. If you're not comfortable with either of those, or if Moody's gone, go ahead and trade back in like the end of the lottery, because you can get it. I think there's more justifiable swings and you have more of a range to swing in that area.
I didn't plan on dipping in the Usman Garuba at all, to be perfectly honest. But since you brought it up, Rich, let's actually stick with that point a little bit. So Garuba comes in 6'8", 220 pounds, ideally more of like a power forward type of player. But if you have somebody like him as your role man, as a small ball center, and also as a short roll playmaker, again, he brings some of that similar dimension. Not quite the same player as Scotty Barnes, not as good of a player in my opinion as Scotty Barnes, but that same type of idea that center who is technically undersized, but he brings a lot of interesting aspects both offensively and defensively to the table. Why do you think that Garuba would be such an intriguing fit? And if you do, is center where you would really want to play him, or do you think that he fits at forward alongside some of those other guys? Maybe you tweak the lineups a different way.
Yeah, so first of all, we don't know what Wendell Carter's future is with the Magic. Of course, they just traded for him, and he was the centerpiece for Nikola Vucevic, but we don't know what's going to happen in free agency next year. We don't know if they're going to give him an extension this year. We have no idea. So that's I think that would send a pretty clear message personally, but maybe they want to flip Wendell Carter for something else. But I really don't know why they would. It would just be about establishing that defensive, honestly, the defensive presence, because you already have Isaac and Carter. And if they want, they could develop, Garuba, and then they all of a sudden have three bigs, and that makes it makes at least one of them pretty expendable to be traded in a big trade.
Let's talk really quick about one guy who I think would be an intriguing fit for Orlando. According to Mox, this would be one hell of a swing, but Rich, I'm watching that footage that came out today, that workout footage from Gavoni on Jade Springer, and man, the more that I watch that kid, the more I fall in love with him. And I sent out a tweet earlier today. Some people were a little confused about the tweet, but I've kind of said all along, when I watch him, and not his mechanics going to some of his mid-range pull-up game, because mechanically, although the video shows massive improvement to me mechanically in that area, he doesn't have that lean back on some of those mid-range pull-ups he was going to anymore. But when I just look at the comfort level and how he's approaching those shots, his willingness to take those shots, he just seems like such a confident mid-range player. We already know from the tape as well as the numbers that he's more than comfortable shooting a standstill three-point shot. He can shoot off the catch, do a few things off the move. He's not afraid to go to the basket. Big, powerful, 6'4", 205-pound guard. And defensively, he has no holes in his game to me other than the things that you could ask him to do where he's not big enough. He's a guard. He's going to guard guards. But in terms of his perimeter defense, to me, there's no holes in his game. Man, I think he has some of the biggest untapped upside of some people in this class. And I really think that if there's one guy who I think popped next year, and we didn't necessarily see it coming, or not a lot of people really saw it coming, I think it could be him. And I think there's a lot of different ways where he could thrive on that Orlando Magic team. What's your evaluation on Springer? How do you feel about him as a player, Rich? And would you like that fit, or would you think it'd be too much of a swing?
It's close to too much of a swing, because to be quite honest, I'm concerned now. I think I've let some smoke get to my head, which is I don't understand why he's being mocked in the 20s when I've had him around like 15, 13, 12 around there all year. I'm like, what did I just not see? And now I'm just like, I go back and watch it, and I'm like, I still don't get it. So like on one hand, if it, like just trusting my own judgment, yeah, I'd probably take him there. But knowing what the NBA knows, or like not knowing, I guess I should say, it makes me so confused and almost worried. So I'm 50-50.
Man, I'm telling you, man, him and Josh Christopher are just like the two guys I keep going back and watching, and I become enthused with them even more. Actually, you could throw Cam Thomas in there. There's so many interesting two guards who can create their own shot, who can be dynamos on or off the ball in this draft class, and obviously Book Knight is in that same discussion as well. There's so many intriguing options for Orlando at 8, but some of these other teams in the back half of the lottery, I can't wait to see where some of these guys go, to be perfectly honest with you. Let's hit on the Mavericks really quick. So they don't have a draft pick, but like every team, they got to send guys on a summer league roster to Vegas. They have to look at guys that bring in the training camp, some undrafted free agent targets. In your mind, Rich, who are like one or two guys that you could see being really, really, really strong targets for the Magic as like undrafted? I mean, for the Mavericks, excuse me, as undrafted free agents. Who are some guys you have in mind?
Yeah, so there's a few. One might have just escaped the undrafted free agency range. Actually, both of them might have at the combine, and that's McKinley Wright and Jericho Sims. They worked really well together, even in the combine. So I really don't know if they're going to be undrafted. So that's a little bit worrisome for me. Other guys, if Julian Champagnie is there somehow, I would love to see him. Scottie Pippen Jr. would be nice. And then just to kind of wrap it up, I would, if they want to stay local, there's a guy who I've gotten to see his shot has changed quite a bit, and that was my biggest knock on him. He's one of the best athletes in the class, probably the best or second best, not named Jalen Green. And that's SMU's Ferran Hunt. He's kind of an obscure prospect. Crazy athletic, 6'8", 6'9", crazy long arms, great finisher at the rim, can put the ball on the floor and get there, and can defend multiple positions. I'd love to see them take a swing on him if they want to stay local.
I saw some workout stuff from him the other day, and I agree with you, Rich. He really impressed me with some of the stuff I was looking at. And I think if Dallas doesn't take a swing on him, I think one of those Texas teams is going to take a swing on him. Maybe it's Dallas, maybe it's Houston, maybe it's San Antonio, but I think one of the three is going to try to bring him in, and who knows, maybe he does get like a two-way type contract with one of those teams. But you talked about McKinley Wright is obviously projected to be a backup point guard in the NBA, and I'm curious because you bring up that position in general. I'm a big Jalen Brunson guy. I've been a big Jalen Brunson guy, but he got torched in the playoffs by those Clippers players. Like he was played so far off the floor, it's to the point where everybody's asking like, why isn't Jalen Brunson in the game right now? Like he could be the option to have somebody next to Luka on the floor right now. And you turn to those people and you're like, well, were you watching him just get played off the floor like 5 minutes ago? Like how's Carlisle going to go back to him and put him back in the game? So when you talk about targeting somebody potentially like McKinley Wright, do you see Jalen Brunson still as the long-term backup point guard in Dallas, or do you think that maybe exploring a low-risk option like a McKinley Wright could be the eventual answer to that question? Like, no, we need to get somebody else in here. Let's take some low-risk swings. Let's try and maybe find that guy while not expending, too much salary or another draft pick or whatever the case may be.
Yeah, so it's actually really hard to say because, what's gotten those kind of guys like Brunson and the people before him and the people that would normally have come in after, the guys who got those guys are gone. Carlisle maximized those backup point guards, and Donnie Nelson, as much as I wasn't a big fan of him, he did a great job at finding talent where there wasn't a lot of talent in undrafted free agency. I mean, he turned JJ Barea into one of the greatest undrafted players of all time. And, I think that dynamic being gone can almost hurt the Mavs in this front, but maybe they also take it more seriously. So it's hard to say. Brunson he comes an unrestricted free agent next summer. So they probably should be looking at high quality chances. McKinley Wright would be a good start, but I don't know if he fully replaces what Brunson does, because there was a period this year where Brunson was heavily flirting with 50, 40, 90. Unfortunately, his free throws just started dropping off, but he still shot 52% and 40% from the 3-point line.
Yeah, he is. He's the picture of efficiency from the backup point guard spot generally. I think the playoffs left a bad taste in everybody's mouth, but yeah, I wouldn't be so quick to necessarily move away from him at that spot. I still think that you got to go ahead forward. You have a guy who's on a good contract as your backup point guard for the future. I wouldn't turn away from that whatsoever. But McKinley Wright could be an interesting option there. I'm a big Matt Coleman guy. He's actually my favorite senior point guard that's coming out in this draft. I was fortunate enough to have him on here for an interview. Another Texas local kid. Maybe Dallas takes a look at him too, along with McKinley Wright. Who knows? But definitely some interesting names that you brought up there for Dallas to bring in and look at. I want to give the floor to you for a little bit, Rich. I told you that I was going to ask you who are a few guys who you think are being really undervalued in your eyes at this point in the draft process. The floor is yours. If you want to take your soapbox right now for anybody, lay your case down, man. I want to hear it.
Man, I think it starts with DJ Stewart of Duke. I think he got a raw hand dealt to him, given the fact that, Duke wasn't that good this year, and it was no fault of his own. Jalen Johnson leaving, Jalen Johnson getting hurt. He was overshadowed by the whole Jalen Johnson situation. Jeremy Roach really didn't live up to his point guard.
No, he didn't.
Yeah, so I don't know really if he got a fair look. I think in a lot of better contexts he does better. 34% from three just doesn't show how good of a shooter DJ Stewart is, and he's also a really good defender with length. So I would say him. I think he's got a very easy spot in the league. I would love to see Dallas actually, buy a pick and get him in 40 to 60 range, because I think he'll be there. So that would be someone who I would start with him. And the other guy, if you want a really high swing at the fences that I don't know why he hasn't gotten the traction, maybe it's recency bias, but because he missed his NCAA tournament.
Draft deeper, man. We want those high swing for the fences. We want to go deep. Give it to me.
I mean, this isn't that deep. If you want a really deep one, I'll go there next. And I'll make this one quick. But Moses Wright, ACC Player of the Year, no traction. Very late to basketball. As a late bloomer, played basketball. I think his senior year was his first year of high school. 4 years later, he's the ACC Player of the Year. Really raw, really versatile. He can play all the front court spots, honestly. He can play 3 through 5 in some lineups. I don't really see the modern NBA giving him a shot at 3, but he could be that guy, that raw senior, that is just a very big exception to the rule where, seniors don't break out. So that would be one. And then if you really, really want to dig deep, I will take every chance on a podcast to plug this guy. He's not coming over this year. I know that for certain, but whenever he does, he is going to be very good. He was one of the Rookie of the Year finalists in France. You probably see me tweet a lot about him, but Matthew Galzine out in, I forget what the team is. I don't know how to say it. I've botched it anyways, but he's out in France. We'll just leave it at that. Combo guard, really good passer out of the pick and roll, really good on-ball defender, needs to get better at pick and roll defense, and needs to refine his jump shot to be a little bit more consistent, and then those percentages will rise. But he's a really good combo guard at 6'4", 6'5", and good length, can defend, and can pass and shoot.
The NBA is always looking for those guys, my friend. So it doesn't surprise me whatsoever that he's going to get on a radar at some point. But that's why we like to have experts like you on. We love to go deep in the draft. I think Moses Wright. That you're right. It's not going really deep, but I think it's going deep enough because I watched him at the combine. He didn't necessarily stand out to me in particular at the combine in more of a quote-unquote NBA setting. We saw him at Georgia Tech. We know what he's capable of in a college setting. What did you feel about his performance at the combine, Rich? Did anything stand out to you that you might not have noticed before? Did it kind of just solidify what you already thought about him?
Yeah, nothing really stood out too much. I mean, he measured well. Those are pretty much it. I mean, I don't take the combine scrimmages entirely that much unless it's a guy who we're like, okay, we saw him I'm trying to think of a prime example, but someone who maybe played weaker competition. Those are the guys who I would look for in those cases. Not really someone who played in a high major conference.
Well, that guy should have been Max Asmus, who came out and dominated everybody, but that didn't happen. I guess that's a really good guy to kind of end the podcast on, Rich. I'll get your take on this. I personally, I'm not going to put a lot of stock into that because he didn't just have a good college season. He had a historic college season. I understand he was never really going to measure out well per se, but I guess a lot of the athletic testing wasn't up to par in terms of what they expected from him. And then he didn't show out in the combine game that he played in. So what do you think about that whole situation with somebody like that, Rich? Somebody who you were expecting to pop off the film in some of those scrimmages. That was like his main opportunity to prove to everybody, like, hey, I'm here. I deserve to be this level of draft pick, but he didn't necessarily make that case in front of those scouts and executives out there.
Yeah, so I mean, he showed out against Oklahoma State back in December. He had a big game
Yep.
against Missouri. I mean, you look at some of the games he played; they had a killer out of conference schedule. They played two D2 schools, and other than that, it was Oklahoma, Arkansas, Oklahoma State, Wichita State, and Missouri. In every single one of those games, ironically enough, actually, the D2 game was his worst because he only played 9 minutes. But every other one, he scored 18, 17, 20, 36 against Oklahoma State. The dude can play. Like what we saw in the tournament wasn't a fluke. It was
Yep.
more of what we already knew. And I think that's, a lot of times I'm like, don't buy into what happened at the tournament because, like Johnny Juzang, I thought that was a fluke. That was not more of what we saw. This was more of the same. So I do think that he will return to school because of how poorly he played at the combine. That is like the one guy where it's like, okay, you can make this takeaway where it left a sour taste. He probably needs to come back. And which sucks because it's great for the college game, but it also sucks for him because what if now, like, there's a few things. One, he's a year older. And then two, what if teams figure him out? Like, he lost a lot of money on that then.
He did because he was the guy that was popping up all over the place, especially in Gavoti and Schmitz's mock to go to Philly at 28 to be a first round guy, and now that's Quentin Grimes taking his spot on that mock for better or worse. But yeah, I agree. He probably needs to go back to school at this point and prove that nothing was a fluke. If he does, if he lives up to that same level of production, not necessarily even he has to take like another step forward because really I don't know how you can take too much of a giant step forward from the production that he put out last year. But if he can do another season of that on par, help Oral Roberts make another tournament type of run again, then yeah, we're probably back in the same spot that we were at this point, and then hopefully he can show out a little bit better in some of that testing and not leave such a sour taste in scouts' minds. You and I are on the same page about that wholeheartedly. But with that being said, Rich, thank you so much for coming on the show today. I wanted to get your perspective on a number of different things like we went over. You are another person, like I had Tyler Rucker on Backcourt Violation the last podcast. You do so many different things. I want you to give my audience all the plugs possible as to what you're doing because you have so much fantastic work in so many different areas. I don't want anybody to miss it if they're not already following you.
I appreciate that. Yeah. So I'm doing a scouting report at least one a day for the next month, I guess. Or well, now what, 20, 27, 28 days till the NBA draft on July 29th. I try and do a video on every single player in the draft, one way or the other, whether it's this one play video or, 30 seconds, 2 minutes, whatever it is. And so I'm doing podcasts on my own at the MavsDraft podcast and then Locked On NBA Draft every Tuesday.
Awesome. And of course, they have to follow you at MavsDraft on Twitter if
Right.
they're not already.
Right.
Although you dwarf me in followers at this point, but anybody who, for whatever reason, isn't following you, they better go follow you. So, Rich, it was a pleasure, man. Thanks for coming on. And as always, to my audience, thank you so much for listening to this episode of the podcast. I wanted to get something else out this week because we're going to take a little bit of time away for the 4th of July holiday. But don't worry, we're going to be coming back stronger than ever because I promised that those Tiers podcasts were coming. That's the next segment of podcast we're going to record. It's going to be me solo in front of a mic, 3 podcasts going over all of my tiers, 102 different players. Holy cow. We're going to live up to the name Draft Deeper over here. We're going to get in some really good discussion. And then from there, I plan on doing a few other podcasts. We'll do our mock drafts with Matt Maurer, NBA draft historian that I've been talking up as well. I hope to get another special guest or two on from there. But again, stay tuned if you aren't already. Follow us on Twitter at Draft Deeper. Subscribe to this podcast wherever you get your podcast, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube. And have a wonderful 4th of July holiday. Can't wait to reconnect back with you guys next week. Have a good one.